Namaste, everyone. Please welcome to Index seminars today. We have Pushpita Prasad from California. She is a board member of CoHNA and is a true grassroots worker advocating Hindu causes in the US and generally in North America. So today's topic is swastika, which is actually conflated by the West, starting with the Aryan theory and so on and so forth. And it continues to be pushed forth to represent fascism and so on and so forth. So Pushpita will present the activism CoHNA has taken up, at least in North America, on the swastika issue, and the pleas that they have made in the West about not banning swastika in the real sense. Over to you, Pushpita.
Thank you, and Namaste, Prasadji. Thank you for inviting me. Very excited to be here and talk about a topic that is very close to the hearts of all of us, namely our sacred swastika, and also help people understand what the issue is, because I think there is a lot of confusion even among dharmic folks of why this problem is happening and what is some of the history behind it. So without further ado, let's get going. I'm just going to have a few slides, and I guess we're going to keep questions to the end, right?
Yeah, that is correct. So you can speak uninterrupted, then we'll have a question and answer.
Wonderful. So I think I'll just start off with a quick introduction about CoHNA, the organization that I am part of. So the Coalition of Hindus of North America, CoHNA, we are a 5013 grassroots rebel Hindu and civil rights organization. Our focus is the United States and Canada. And our charter really is to help drive education on matters that are important to Hindus, and very importantly, advocate for them. And the swastika issue is a perfect example of why advocacy is so important, as I hope we'll get to talk to. But I wanted to actually start off with a little bit of context, because it's very important to understand why are we even here today and what is the background of this presentation. So this was a presentation that we have created for educational purposes and to create awareness about the sacred swastika symbol vis-a-vis the Hakenkreuz, and to help people understand why the two are different and should not be conflated. Obviously, this does not mean that we do not stand in solidarity with the oppressed. Of course, we stand in complete solidarity with the Jewish and all other communities that have and continue to be targeted by supremacists and hate groups of all types. But why are we even talking about the swastika today? And let's look at some basic definitions that should help contextualize our discussion. So as I'm sure everybody on the call knows, the swastika is an ancient Sanskrit word, which basically means that brings good luck. The word, it comes from Suasti, and the word occurs as far back as the Vedas, as well as in many types of classical Hindu literature. It has various meanings: health, luck, success, prosperity, etc. The more when you talk to people more knowledgeable than me, they will give you many details about, the 4 arms stand for the 4 goals of life, which is dharma, artha, kam, etc. Or it could stand for the 4 Vedas and many other beliefs that center around this very revered and very ancient symbol. Obviously, it is also revered by all the dharmic faiths, especially Buddhists, Hindus, and Jains, and we'll get to that later in the presentation about why it's very important to remember that. What, on the other hand, is the Hakenkreuz? I don't know how many folks are familiar with the Hakenkreuz. Certainly, in the last 2-3 years, we've seen a lot of expansion of knowledge on this term, something that even I myself came to know just in the past few years. But Hakenkreuz is basically a German word, which quite literally translates to hooked cross. And in the modern understanding, it was a symbol that was designed and used by Hitler and the Nazi Party. Obviously, to the Jewish people and all the other communities that came under that came under the genocidal actions of Hitler, this is an extremely evil symbol. And we have to remember that it was responsible for the extermination of millions of people, Jews, Roma, homosexuals, others. And the Hakenkreuz has been used and continues to be used even today to strike hard into the fear of minorities, people of color. But like all symbols, like all words, it's important to remember that the swastika, as opposed from the Hakenkreuz, has been used continuously for at least 10,000 years, and today is held as extremely sacred by more than 2 billion people globally. So the reason I wanted to spend time talking about it is the importance of words. And if you look at words in the modern day context, you'll find that a lot of words, their understanding and grounding them is really important. And we only have to look at modern movements like the LGBTQIA movement to see how the meaning of words has real impact and changes, sometimes for the positive, sometimes for the negative. If you look at the word queer, for example, it started off in English as a very negative word, but today it's taken as a symbol of empowerment, and there is a lot of pride in that. The swastika in the Western lexicon has sort of gone the other way, and it's really time to understand the roots of that and take it back, so as to say. Obviously, these are very familiar pictures to everybody. You can find the swastika all over where dharmic communities reside, including among Buddhists, and the Jain symbol, which is what you see here. And of course, we'll run short of time if we were to encapsulate the many, many ways. But what is this symbol, this very symbol that is that we are very familiar with? How does it show up in different parts of the world? Many people don't realize the long and historic role of the hooked cross in Christianity. This was a symbol that they also used historically, and we shared here a few examples of the hooked cross that you can find in many, many different historical churches and contexts. So here you see hooked crosses on a cathedral from the 1300s in Winchester, England. Here you see hooked crosses on the floor of a church in Mexico from like a couple of centuries ago. And here you see a hooked cross. It's maybe a little hard to see, but it's integrated into the sacred cross that is being carried by a priest at the ancient La Bella Church in Ethiopia. You can Google many more examples, but we just wanted to share a few. And then the same symbol shows up under a different name, the whirling logs, among many Native American tribes, especially the Navajos, which is where that term whirling log comes from, and where it represents well-being, good luck, and protection. It also holds significance for some other tribes. But you can sort of see that these are, Native Americans, the Navajo rugs are very famous, and you can see the symbol that looks very familiar to our own showing up on their weaving, on their rugs, in their art, and in their drums that were used in ceremonial occasions. And then this symbol, as we call it, even under the word swastika, enjoyed a lot of pre-war popularity in Europe in the early 20th century. And it was widely used as a good luck symbol, as you can see from the usage here. Coca-Cola was issuing charms with the swastika. It actually graced the sides of US Air Force planes. It was stamped onto Boy Scout coins. Teams, it was very popular, sports teams uniforms to have the swastika, used for marketing and different types of sales purposes, playing cards. It was even used as a street sign symbol in states where Native American communities lived. So you can see that the symbol itself is almost a universal human symbol. And it has been found through history in archaeological digs all over the world. And it was enjoying a resurgence in popularity at the start of the 20th century, even under the name swastika. So I think those are some important backgrounds to keep in mind. But what happened from there on? And why did I start my presentation by saying the swastika is not the Hakenkreuz? I think we spent the initial slides going through the different usages and names just to show that obviously as a symbol itself, the shape itself has a lot of meanings to different people, and it's a pretty universal symbol. But what happened exactly in the context of Nazi Germany? Want to make sure that people understand. Hitler used the word Hakenkreuz, not swastika. And let us look at the history as we looked. It was popular in pre-World War Europe. But what exactly was what was Hitler seeing? How was Hitler interacting with this symbol? So the hooked cross actually has a long history in Christianity, as we showed, and it symbolizes Jesus's victory over death and persecution. And if you look at Christian iconography through the centuries, the cross appears in many, many different shapes and forms, and you saw a couple of them. But specifically for Hitler, he grew up in the shadow of this place called the Lambach Abbey. And this picture that we show here is quite literally on the walls of that abbey, the hooked cross. And this is something he was very powerfully influenced by. And for him, growing up in the shadow of this abbey, it was natural to see the connection, between and be influenced by the hooked cross. And unfortunately, when he was looking to build his own political influence, to use this ancient symbol of Christianity into a powerful yet evil symbol. And if you read the writings of Hitler, he actually experimented in how to, superimpose this cross onto the red and white background and come up with a much more visually powerful and stunning symbol. There's a lot of scholars who have actually written about it and the power of colors, symbols, and words. But the point to remember is that he was trying to influence his German fellow citizens at the time, and they, like him, were fully aware of the history and connections of the Hakenkreuz with their own faith and culture. So that is an important point to keep in mind. So did Hitler ever actually use the swastika? This is one of the most fundamental beliefs that we need to get to. And if you look at the original text from Mein Kampf, which is his autobiography, which he wrote in German, you will find that there is no mention of the word swastika, but there is lots of references to the word Hakenkreuz. We've pulled out a few things here. You can see a few different references. I don't speak German, I'm sure most of you don't, but you can easily see the word Hakenkreuz jumping out. And you can also see that the word swastika is not jumping out. And the first English translation of the Mein Kampf by Dugdale actually did correctly use the hooked cross as a translation for Hakenkreuz. Unfortunately, subsequent translations and even more importantly, journalism and then after that Hollywood started to use the word swastika, and that is what has sort of set it in public mind and public perception as though Hitler had used swastika. But really there is no evidence that Hitler had any knowledge of Sanskrit. And we know that Hitler was not a fan of brown people. His treatment of the Indian team in the 1936 Olympics is quite evidence that he had no love for Indians or Indian culture or Sanskrit. But let's compare one of the most popular quotes, and let's look at what highly respected websites like the Holocaust Encyclopedia and the Holocaust Museum say. So you will say this is the language they use, right? In English, they say Mein Kampf wrote, and in Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler wrote, blah, 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 the swastika, blah, 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 the swastika. I think some folks, can everybody mute themselves? I'm getting some background noise. Thank you so much. So I pulled this quote from the Holocaust Museum's website because it's obviously in the state context of the North America, one of the most respected sites. And you can see that unfortunately, even mainstream respected sources like this are falling into that same trap. And you can see that they claim in English that Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler wrote XYZ, the black swastika, etc. However, again, if you go back to the source, if you go back to Mein Kampf in German, you can see very clearly there is no reference to swastika, only references to Hakenkreuz. And this is really important because in the context of Hitler, we are not talking about an ancient Stone Age civilization. We are not talking about an archaeological dig relying on stone tablets to understand what's going on. We're talking about events that happened 100 years ago in a language that continues to be widely read, it's one of the major world languages today. So this stuff is not something that, is not hard to check out. So really important to keep that in mind. But yet you see this mistranslation. So we live in the era of Google and everybody uses Google. I invite everybody to undertake this experiment on their own. If you go to the Google Translate and you pick German to English, if you type in the word Haken, it will give you the word hooked. or hook. If you type in the word Kreuz, it'll give you the word cross. But interestingly enough, if you put in Hakenkreuz together, out comes swastika. It makes no sense. How does hook and cross suddenly turn to swastika, a completely different word from a completely different language halfway across the world? So you can see, obviously, this is not algorithms. Somebody has gone in there and made this change. So again, it just defies logic. And then we have to look at it in terms of a pattern and a context. So the Hakenkreuz, while the swastika, as you can see, seems to exist in a vacuum when you look at German history, German words, German technology, German usage of the words, the Kreuz comes up regularly. The German language has many, many words that associate with the cross, and why wouldn't they, given their deep history with Christianity? So a few examples that we pulled out are, Christian Kreuz, which is the Christian cross, Hakenkreuz, which we've already talked about, Ritterkreuz, which is actually the Knight's Cross, translates as the Knight's Cross, and it's a military symbol that was created by Hitler to reward folks in the military. There was the Wickenkreuz, the Krummerkreuz, and many, many more. So you can see that all these words have the root word Kreuz, and they fit in as part of a broader pattern. Those of you from India and know about Indian military honors, you can see that when India does military honors, there's similarly a root word chakra, and all the military honors, go into that: Ashok Chakra, Veer Chakra, Mahavir Chakra, Paramveer Chakra. There is a pattern and a logic to it, and there is a pattern and logic to the usage of the word Kreuz in Germany. And swastika does not fit into this pattern. There was literally no usage of this word by the Germans or the Nazis themselves. Sorry, my slides are not. So what is and again, if you go back to Google Translate and you type in these words, you'll find, again, the Christian Kreuz coming up as Christian cross, but Hakenkreuz coming up as swastika. So you don't have to be a linguist, you don't have to be a professor of languages or something to see that this doesn't quite make sense. Why is this mistranslation happening? What's the reason behind it, and why do we do it? Going back to Nazi history, so Nazi propaganda, and so the Nazis were avid propagandists. Like I said, we're talking about 100 years ago. So they did a lot of their own propaganda because they were trying to influence their own citizens and then those of the countries that they captured. So there was a lot of literature that was being printed by not just the Nazis, but other leaders at the time. And again, you see here the snapshot of a brochure that was printed by Gerhard Kahn, a prominent leader of the Lutheran Church of Hanover. And he is explaining to his followers and those who follow, get influenced by him, that the cross of Christ, the regular Christian cross that we're all familiar with, and the Hakenkreuz do not oppose each other, that they're complementary and they supplement each other in thinking and in action and in how they empower those that believe in them. So again, his book was attempting to reconcile the Christian Kreuz and the hooked cross and make direct connections of Nazi philosophy with Christianity. There are lots of German books that refer to the Hakenkreuz from that era. Again, the question that all of us need to ask is, where is the swastika? Nobody's talking about the swastika, so one has to take it from the mouths of those who are actually doing this versus those who came later and tried to interpret it or whitewash the whole thing by importing the words of a culture and a language and a system that was completely disconnected from this faith. So let's look at what were the media saying at the time. Again, this is the rise of Hitler is very, very well documented, very, very well covered in Western press. So let's look at what the New York Times even back then claimed the role of being the paper of record, right? So this is a New York Times article from November of 1922. So just about 100 years ago. And you can see that they're talking about the rise of Hitler. But what are they calling Hitler and his symbols? They talk about Hitler and his Hakenkreuz lures. And then Hitler's Hakenkreuz movement. So the symbol of Hakenkreuz was so common and so popular that it was actually giving its name to the followers themselves. They were not called the swastikaers or the swastika lovers. They were called Hakenkreuzlers. And this is the New York Times. This is not any Hindutva press. Similarly, what was the Jewish Daily Bulletin of 1925 saying? You can see that, it is obviously starting to record with concern the various attacks that are starting to happen on the Jewish communities. There are about 18 references to Hakenkreuz and Hakenkreuzlers. So again, this is the word that everybody associated with Hitler back then. The Nazis, as I said, were avid propagandists. They had their own paper. And guess what they called it? They called it the Hakenkreuz banner, not the swastika banner or anything else. And New York Times, as late as 1934, was continuing to use the word Hakenkreuz to describe Hitler and his symbols. So what happened and when did that change? This is about one of the first times that we can find a mainstream newspaper, once again, the New York Times, which has played a very seminal role in driving this narrative. In 1933, the New York Times starts to change its own terminologies. You can see we showed you articles from 22, and starts to suddenly use the word swastika in the context of Germany. And of course, as you can see, most change takes time. So even though they did this in 33, the earlier slide that I showed you showed that in 34, their local correspondents continued to call it the Hakenkreuzlers till at some point they made the change. There are many reasons as to why they made this change. There are scholars that are now looking at this more deeply. CoHNA has done a fantastic talk that I invite folks with time to look at with a Jewish scholar called Jeff Kelman. You can find it on our YouTube channel. And Jeff has actually done his master's thesis on this very topic and has some very interesting background into what might have driven some of these change. And as he mentions, this is a topic of growing interest as to why the Western media, the Western thinkers and talkers suddenly started calling Hitler's symbol Hakenkreuz as the swastika, reversing what they had been doing in the first 10 years of the rise of Hitler. So I'll move on from the history. And let's talk about now the impact of this misappropriation, because many folks are, well, it doesn't matter. This is all 100 years ago. What does that have to do with my life today? Hitler's dead and gone, and the swastika is lost forever. So let's look at what is the impact of this misappropriation. And I'll start with the misappropriation on some non-dharmic communities. So as I mentioned in the start of my slide, this symbol, which was known as the whirling log, was very sacred to several Native American tribes that lived here as well. Interestingly enough, in 1940, the US government asked these tribes to forego the use of their sacred symbol. And you can see they had started calling it the swastika by then, even though the tribes themselves call it the whirling log. So you can see this desire of the Western media to sort of start crushing all these words into the swastika. And very unfortunately, the Native American tribes, given how persecuted they were at the time, they did agree to stop using their own sacred symbol. But that fallout plays out even today. I showed you even every now and then you will find old road signs, courthouses, old buildings that were built before the 1930s, 1920s that have these symbols. And in those points, the Native American tribes have to give up symbols or historical artifacts that were sacred to them. And there was a recent incident just this year when one of the Native American tribes were trying to sell one of their old rugs. Obviously, there is a big market for Native American weaving and rugs and things like that. And somebody was selling an old rug, which normally would have commanded a lot of good prices. But because it was displaying the whirling log, it created this huge outrage in the market, and people were protesting, asking them to remove it, calling these poor descendants of the Native American tribes as Nazis. Very ironic, considering who was the persecutor and who's the persecuted. But more familiar to all of us from dharmic communities is the impact that we have on our day-to-day life. So these are all recent articles from the last few years. So in Australia, there was a homeowner who had a rangoli in their Diwali outside the house. And that got defaced by a delivery man who came to drop off a package or something and was horrified because the Western media, the Western education system teaches us that this symbol can be nothing but the horrible Nazi Hakenkreuz. In George Washington University a few years ago, a Jewish student who had been to India and had understood the wider context of the symbol actually got into trouble and was suspended for displaying a souvenir that he brought back from India, which had the swastika. And he was a Jewish student He was a descendant of, Holocaust survivors, and he was trying to do his bit and help other folks understand. But even somebody with his background got into trouble. So imagine what can happen to an Indian student, which is exactly what we talk about in our next slide. So this is an Indian American student. She became the University Student Union of Brandeis University, which is a private Jewish university. And when in 2021, when New York was one of the first states to try and ban the display of the swastika and term it a hate symbol, she said, I understand the symbology of, both usages. I come from a culture where this is very, very sacred, very, very omnipresent in our lives, and is a very, very auspicious symbol. But I understand the context in the Western frame where I live in, and I want to help bridge the gap. For attempting to do this, she was like, virtually feathered and tarred, and ultimately had to apologize. People were literally hounding her. And you can see the language that, the very vicious language that immediately starts to appear when you try to make these conversations. Again, going back to the importance of words, because folks have been taught to think that there is only one word, and it is swastika. I could go on and on, but I'll just leave you with a few examples. So again, in Clifton, same problem. Somebody had put a swastika decoration on their front door and had it up for years. And then some neighbor walking by suddenly took umbrage and was horrified to think that there was a Nazi living in the neighborhood, not stopping to realize that, why would a hate group put up a hate symbol on their own door? Like, I think people don't think logically. If you're putting up something on your own door, you're obviously not wishing yourself death. And if conversely, if you're putting up a symbol of good luck, it means you're wishing yourself good luck. You wouldn't do that if you thought it was bad. Gas station owner gets into trouble, similar problem. Diwali Rangoli, Diwali artifacts, puja artifacts, all the time has it. I want to talk about this for a second. This happened very recently. Right here in the Bay Area, California, where I live, there is a very, very popular summer camp for kids called the Hidden Villa Camp. And it's done in this old sort of ranch building that's about 100 years old. And it's a very popular summer camp. You literally have to register your kids in January to get a spot. It sells out immediately. I think about 600-700 kids go to it every year. This year, it suddenly shut down and left 600 kids over the summer without a home. And what happened? Well, the staffers at the camp quit en masse because somewhere in this old building, they discovered a swastika. And they were not willing to be convinced. These are obviously educated people. They should understand the context. And they knew that this was a symbol that had been brought over to this building in 1911. So it way predated the rise of Hitler. They also knew that it was Buddhist in origin. Still, despite knowing those two facts, there was an en masse resignation because people have been trained to have such a visceral, emotional reaction that they don't look at context, they don't look at history, they just have a kind of like, I cannot deal with it and move on. And as Hindu communities, Jain communities, Buddhist communities have become part of the milieu in the West, this is something that we cannot let be. Because we cannot give up a sacred symbol. We just have to undertake the very difficult task of educating people, and it might take a generation. But if you don't start today, you're not going to fix it even in a generation. And then those folks who think that, this is only a problem of the West, India is immune from it. I like to point out how this symbol, if we don't take it back, if we don't fix the education, it's going to get worse and worse. Already now we have moved on from, the swastika being what was the Nazi symbol to now basically saying, okay, Hitler was inspired by Hindu nationalism. And if we don't challenge the popular understandings of these symbols, this is something that will happen because Joe Schmo on the ground is not going to spend 1 hour understanding the background of one symbol versus the other. If they grow up with the unchallenged understanding that this four-armed symbol that they see all over the place is nothing but evil, nothing but related to Nazism, it becomes very easy to start ascribing evil to the symbol even when they see it in a non-Western context. And you can see some famous Hindu folks like Audrey Trutchke have already started to do that. This is the tweet that she made a few months ago. And look at the choice of words. she's talking about India. She's not talking about the swastika in the West, but she says the swastika is used in India in a somewhat ambiguous sense. Very important to remember. So this is how narratives change. Back in 1944, 1940s, had the dharmic communities been in a situation to take back or stop control of this narrative that, Nazis were using the word swastika versus Hakenkreuz, we wouldn't have a situation today where 2 generations of Jewish people have grown up thinking that the swastika is what drove the Holocaust. And if we don't take control today, we are going to have another 2 generations later, Indians or Indian kids who grow up thinking that swastika is used in India in a somewhat ambiguous sense, and that Hitler was definitely inspired by Hindu symbols, even though there is literally no evidence that Hitler had any love or respect for any Eastern religion. So I think this is a very important point to keep in mind. I think the audience here is global, so it's not just something that impacts us in the US or Canada or Australia or Europe, but it will start to impact us in India as we grow into an increasingly interconnected and digital world. The other example I like to provide for India is that you can try the Google Translate in India. I'm pretty sure you'll get the same flawed results. So we do live in a global world where symbols have unfortunately come to have a global meaning. And so it's really important that these issues be tackled in a very respectful, measured, and patient way, because it will take time to change the understanding that has grown over the last 70 years. So let's talk a little bit about the legislation. So the last 2 years, maybe more, but in the last 2 years, we have seen a slew of legislation come up around attempts to ban this symbol, to term it a symbol of hate, to term it a symbol of terror. And we saw it first start in 2021 with New York, where a senator tried to introduce it as a symbol of hate. And the training basically was that anybody seeing the symbol, children basically would have been taught that if you see the symbol, you just need to call 911. That's how dangerous it is. I hope people understand the implication of what that means, because you could have your kid's friend come over to your house for a play date, and they could absolutely freak when they see, your puja room or a swastika up on a picture of, any Devi Devta or your puja paraphernalia. Or of course, if they visit you around Diwali and they see swastika anywhere. So this was something that CoHNA and other different groups reached out to the senator who had introduced the bill and started to educate him both on the relevance of the swastika to the broader dharmic communities, as well as the fact that, it was never used as a Nazi word. It was not a Nazi symbol. And New York and other states owe it to their children to teach them the correct thing. So we did meet with success in bills, and in New York State, where the bill was taken back. The state of Maryland introduced a similar bill, and the Hindu groups advocated for a similar approach, and the bill was taken back. Hopefully it will come back with better language. In New Jersey, in the state of New Jersey, we are actually seeing what might be the best outcome, because the bill was introduced with very flawed language, but after interaction and advocacy with the state lawmakers' offices, they actually agreed to amend the bill, and the bill is now moving forward with the correct words that start to use the words Hakenkreuz, your Nazi symbol. It starts to de-link the swastika from Nazi ideology, and I'll go into that more. But the New Jersey bill was also talking of Nazi swastikas in the beginning, and now it has dropped reference to Nazi swastikas and just talks about Nazi emblem and Hakenkreuz. For those of you in Canada, there are a couple of bills that are winding their way through the Canadian Parliament. The first one being a private bill that was introduced by a Canadian MP. And again, we have to thank Member of Parliament Chandra Arya. He's a Liberal Party member who stood up on the floor of Canadian Parliament in March. And I think this might be the first time this kind of statement has become part of the official record. But he stood on the floor of the Canadian Parliament and basically appealed to his fellow parliamentarians to stop calling the Nazi symbol as the swastika, whether it's a Nazi swastika or whatever they were appending it with, because as he spoke very eloquently, he said, every time you do that, you spread false knowledge, and you hurt those feelings of 1 billion Hindus, Buddhists and Jains who live in this area. And you need to use the right word, Hakenkreuz. So we definitely thank the Honorable Member of Parliament for that. And very exciting for us as CoHNA is that Chandra Arya actually later on in his Twitter feed said that he had found our Swastika education camp awareness brochure very helpful, and he had actually sent it to all his fellow members of Parliament for further education to help them understand the background. But the problems continue. So the Canadian bill is still in process. We hope it actually comes back with the correct language. But for those of you who know the lawmaking process, it works slowly. So we'll see where it goes, but everybody needs to keep their eye on that. Similar action going on right now in California, my own home state, where in March, there was a bill introduced, which basically, and I'm going to go into it later, but we are seeing similar advocacy in California, where Hindu and Buddhist groups came together to push back and to the state assembly to express their disappointment on the way the bill is currently worded. And my next slide goes into that in detail. But in other exciting news, we've actually seen more than 120 Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain organizations sign on a single petition that asks California to stop reinforcing falsehoods. I think that's very exciting news for those of us who say Hindus don't unite. So it's not just Hindus uniting, but Hindu, Buddhists, and Jains uniting in this fight to take back our symbol. And the bill might still go through, but I think the movement that it is spanning is important. So since I talked about the California bill, and since California has an outsized impact on legislation across vast parts of the United States, at least given its size and scale, I just wanted to explain what the problems with this bill is and what is important for everybody on the call to understand, because you will see a slew of these bills pop up in different states. And actually, before I go into that, why are we, and so what's the problem here, right? So the bill has language that while it does now include the word Hakenkreuz, which is great. This is the first time the California state is going to actually reference this Nazi word Hakenkreuz. The way the bill is written, it actually repeats the faulty language that you have right now already. So it repeats the words Nazi Swastika, which I think everybody needs to understand is an oxymoron. The word Nazi Swastika is just an oxymoron. So the new bill repeats that hateful words, and then it actually goes on to say that the Nazi swastika was the official emblem of the Nazi Party. And this is actually worse because the current California Penal Code does not say that Nazi swastika was the official emblem of the Nazi Party. So what are 120 Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain groups asking for? Well, the first ask, and I think this is an ask that should be replicated anytime anybody finds a bill popping up in their state, on their police websites, and their teacher education, is like, do not use the words Nazi swastika. We've shown you lots of slides that show that that's just fake. If nothing else, we owe it to educate with the correct concepts, even if we don't. And then, of course, there's a problem that this fake stuff is hurtful. You need to use generic words like Nazi emblem or Nazi hate symbol. In the case of California, we have been told that a new law cannot fix the old penal code, which is what contains the word Nazi swastika. Well, if that's the case, ask your lawmakers to qualify the old bills by using words such as incorrectly or falsely known as the Nazi swastika, instead of going in the opposite direction and saying officially known as the Nazi swastika. So that's our California specific ask, and I'll move on from that. But I think advocacy, as if I haven't already stressed it enough, advocacy is critical. Many folks in our community are sometimes scared to speak up. They don't want to get political. They think speaking up is wrong. It will make them the targets of hate. But actually, advocacy is about as American as apple pie, and I'm sure as Canadian as well. And I wanted to share a few examples where, I mentioned 4 different states where we've been advocating on this issue in the US. And I wanted to share some examples here from Canada, where the private member who introduced the bill that I referenced actually then sent a letter to the Hindu Federation of Canada, thanking them for the outreach and education, because this is how the system is supposed to work. You're supposed to be looking out for your own interests, and you're supposed to be reaching out and making sure that people understand your viewpoint, your history, your culture. The onus is on us to speak for ourselves versus relying on others to find out about us accurately. If we rely on others, they're going to do Google searches, they're going to come up with articles from New York Times, etc. And we've already seen how flawed that narrative is. And then I think I mentioned about Chandra Arya earlier. He urged Canada to distinguish between the swastika and Nazi symbols. So I hope that this kind of screenshots that I'm sharing here encourages everybody on this call to make sure that they are out there engaging their networks, because every time, like I have personally spoken to about 20 lawmaker officers over the past few months on this and other topics. And I always tell you that 95% of the staffers we spoke to, forget the lawmakers, the staffers who are the ones who actually go ahead and create these bills, 95% of them did not know that the swastika had a wider dharmic meaning, a benign meaning for so many of their constituents. And most of them are very thankful to get to know that. That is how, like I keep saying, the process works. They're there to hear from you. They're there to hear your concerns. So please, please, please educate yourself and start reaching out to educate others. There's some other resources that you can leverage. So there's obviously the CoHNA website that I'll leave links to. But there's a new multi-faith initiative and coalition that came together just in the last month. That is called the understandingswastika.org. You can check out their website. And this is a coming together of Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain organizations to basically, we realize that we are in for the long haul. And so you have the faith leaders from all these different groups, including some Native American tribes. It is very interesting to hear their take on it. You can actually find the replay of a 4-hour conference that happened in June up on our YouTube channel. And for those of you with time, just go ahead and hear some of the segments. Fascinating to hear Tibetan Buddhist, Japanese Buddhist, Jain groups, Native American grandmothers, and of course, Hindus, different Hindu sampradayas talk about the relevance and importance of this symbol. Another great warrior on this front is Dr. T.K. Nakagaki, a Japanese Buddhist monk who has basically made it his life's mission. He is the author of a book called The Buddhist Swastika and Hitler's Cross, and came up with a lot of the research that is now becoming more and more popular, and is one of CoHNA's great partners in this fight. And Jeff Kelman, the Jewish scholar that I mentioned earlier. So I've talked a lot and I'm going to stop now, but I want to just leave a little bit of final thought about why this fight is so important, is that we are just asking folks to understand the context. We are not denying the Holocaust or the atrocities that happened. We are not denying the hooked cross that fronted a lot of those atrocities. We are asking for people to get the full picture and understand the history and breadth of this symbol, how it's used by multiple cultures through history across the globe and today. And once you give children and adults the context, they will get it. All of us can distinguish between the hateful intent of a burning cross today versus the intent of a sacred cross. When we see it, we don't freak when we see somebody wearing a crucifix necklace, or we don't freak when we see a cross on somebody's door. And we want to get to but we do get wary when we see the cross used in a hateful context. These hateful symbols of the cross, if we see them, as graffiti in a white supremacist mark, we can get it. I mean, everybody can get it from the context. And the swastika deserves no less. It deserves to be taught in the full context so that people can figure out the intent based on context. And you can see very clearly when you see this symbol as part of a group of menacing young men shouting hate slogans, this is the Hakenkreuz. When you see it as a beautiful rangoli, as a puja artifact in somebody's house, in somebody's jewelry, this is not something to be scared of. And we owe it to them, because just think about it. Do you want to be the person lost on a road, in a country road, looking for directions, You see a house, you go there, you see a swastika rangoli, and you run away screaming instead of getting help. Millions of things like that. So I'm going to stop here now. The slides, we have more, lots of more resources for those of you that are interested, but I know I went a little bit over. So I will stop now. And over to you, Prasadji.
No, excellent information, Pushpita ji. And congratulations to yourself and CoHNA for taking this initiative. And also in the Canadian context, Chandra Arya is a very excellent legislator on our side. And we speak to him on a regular basis. And he is very, very positive in the Canadian Parliament. And he does floor all these bills and even statements promoting our causes. Thank you for bringing that up. What is being done in Germany to correct the confusion between swastika and Hakenkreuz? Are you aware of anything?
I'm not aware precisely, but interestingly, in Germany, they still, as far as I'm aware, they still use the word Hakenkreuz. I mean, why, you know, and that makes sense. If you write in German, why would you be using? But I'm not an expert on Germany. But I would encourage somebody to check that out. You know, this is, like I said, an advocacy movement. So the more people that take it up, the stronger we will become as a community.
Balera, please go ahead.
Okay. Good morning. First of all, thank you so much. This was absolutely incredible information. It enlightens me, it educates me. I always had this confusion. At the bottom of my heart, I always knew that there is something, but did not know what it is. So I sincerely appreciate all the effort and all the information you shared. I just have one request. I would recommend you don't call it swastika. The swastik is the right pronunciation. Swastika is not the right word. And again, we keep on spreading these words and they become popular, which are wrong words like Rama, Krishna, yoga, and swastika here. Thank you so much.
Sure, noted, thank you. We are all products of our colonial upbringing, so we all have more to learn.
I agree.
Okay.
Hello, ma'am. Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
I just want to inform you that I'm a lawyer from India. I'm an international lawyer. So how we can help the CoHNA from the mainland of the India, from the home country? How we can help CoHNA from this part of the world? So as a lawyer, as an international lawyer, because I deal into the immigration laws and all, so I just want to help the CoHNA as an organization. So whatever we need from us, we want to study some laws, US laws also we are studying because I'm practicing the taxation and all, international taxation. So if anything, and I also done my certification in the German language long before 15 years ago. So somehow I can try to study for the CoHNA and for the making laws. So you have to give some direction to us.
Yeah, so please, is that Sharatji talking or Vivek?
It's Vivek Garg.
Yes,
oh,
I'm
okay.
Vivek.
So Vivekji, please reach out to us. You can find my email. It's pushpita.prasad@cohna.org. And of course, you can reach us through our website as well. That's for the whole audience. So we would love to partner on specifically. In one sense, the Indian government obviously has a huge role to play because these are, I think that's why I spent some time explaining the impact on India, right? Not just the West. In the West, the impact is obvious, and we are a minority community here, very vulnerable in many different ways. But we have seen in Canada, the Indian community, the Indian government, these are symbols that are sacred to the Indian subcontinent. So I hope that the Indian government helps put some resources towards the fight in terms of education, in terms of what the embassies can do. Obviously, the swastika is not being banned in India, but for those of you from an Indian law perspective, something to explore might be working with big tech companies in India, like Google India. What do they do? What could they do differently to be more respectful and reflective of being the global company that they are? So there's a lot of opportunities, because as you can see, this was only scratching the surface. The more you get into this issue, the more you find problems with it everywhere. So I think, yeah, there's a lot you could do. To me, the tech companies come to mind, because they are the ones that are now sort of setting, they are the ones that now set meaning and definition for everybody, and especially for the new generation growing up. From those of you, and so make sure in India people understand, because I think Indian communities are, India, all of us, me included, are sort of notorious for not understanding the long-term impact of issues. And that's why I keep going that obviously in the 1940s, when this propaganda started, we were still under British rule. But had we been in a different place and in an opportunity, in a place to push back right then, we wouldn't have had such a massive problem today. So everybody needs to tackle this in their communities, no matter where they are, whether it's India, whether it's Europe, Australia, United States, Canada, etc. And you can speak up in your kids' schools, you can speak up in your colleges, you can speak up at your local libraries, go to your police station. And that goes for people in India too. I'm sure many schools in India, I'm actually positive that most schools in India do not know this context of swastika, Hakenkreuz, and they need to be aware, just like we need to make schools in the US aware. So I hope that was helpful.
I have one question, quick one. Sorry, Sharadji, go ahead.
Okay, so it was a good presentation. Thank you so much. I'm an Indian American in Tennessee. So I feel is instead of we, and it's a good work by CoHNA, but instead of we continuously trying to present our case as a victim, I think government of India has to take initiative, especially with Modi ji very close to Israel. And if the Jews, if it comes from Israel, and if it is said in the United Nations, that top-down approach will work. Then, we basically trying to fight all these Rakta Bij, which is mentioned in our Puranas, because they will not stop. They will not stop. It is just not the lack of knowledge, Ms. Prasad. It's basically the colonial, the race, everything is all inbuilt in this psyche of not accepting our swastika. And that's where we will never win against this Rakta Bij. So it has to be a top-down approach. Modi ji has to make Israel president go and talk in the United Nations, because it's the Jews who are the sufferers. And we are trying to, play and trying to put our case against the majority Christians, which has nothing to do with this symbol. So that's the view. Thank you so much.
I am not connected to Modi ji, but anybody who wishes to take it on, I think it is good. I think we need both top down, but we also need bottoms up, because this is truly a, yes, it will take a while, because when people have grown up, and this is why I told you I have some very good Jewish friends, but the problem is that she has been to my house, and she was shocked to see my name on the CoHNA. When I sent her the CoHNA website, she had an emotional reaction. She's like, you guys are like, she almost changed her opinion of me. So there is a very emotional reaction that you have to tackle on a one-on-one bottoms-up approach too. Support from the top is absolutely important and should happen. And the role of Israel, the role of the Jewish rabbis, everything should be leveraged. But again, that can also be, if the Indian government and Modi ji wants to take it up, that is amazing. But in the meantime, we all have a role to play. CoHNA is an action-oriented organization. And while we would love it if somebody else came and did stuff, we are not waiting for that. We want each of us to go and make a difference in wherever we can. So go out and talk to your Jewish friends, go to your nearest synagogue, ask for a meeting with the rabbi. We can come and make a presentation to them, help them understand. I mentioned a few times the scholar Jeff Kelman. He has made a fabulous presentation on it, and he's a Jewish scholar, studied at a Holocaust university, and this is the topic of his research. And we are starting to see more scholars now get into it. So let us, all of them, find them, support them, amplify their voice. I think we have to help ourselves too.
Excellent point, Pushpita ji. Narayan ji, please go ahead.
Namaskar. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I salute to all for this presentation. Prasad to bring it up as well. And in between your mail came saying how we are connected. That apart, I might have missed first 1 or 2 minutes probably. And that is the word swastik is derived from this. This was initiated by Vedic Institute, and therefore in Vedas or in Veds, the Sanskrit root swasti. Was it explained, Pushpita ji, before?
Yes.
You did. You
Yeah,
did.
that was like my second slide, because I said, before we start a conversation, let's center it in definition. I come
Yes.
from a communications background. So for
Yes.
me, words are very, very important. And I think one of the problems, and I find it interesting that, in our community, we have not understood yet the power of words. And we are very quick to give up our words or modify them. We really need to understand the power of words because they really contextualize and create way more than one word might think to have. So yes, we did talk about its Vedic origins and the many, many different ways this word is used and thought about.
I'm impressed, and I'm sorry I was a little late.
That's okay, no worries.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
So, Parag ji, please go ahead.
Yeah, just one small note again on Google Translate. You mentioned that it translates to swastik. At Translate, there is a mechanism or an option available to suggest incorrect translations. So I myself will do that, but I will also tell my contacts and my social network to do the same. But in every talk, if you also recommend your audience to do that, if they get like maybe a few thousand feedbacks, they will correct it.
Yeah, well, you can see, so there is nothing wrong in doing that. It is a good thing, but don't rely on it to change it, because you can see that this is not an algorithm at work. There has been human intervention to make that change. And so there will need to be a lot of pushback. One of the reasons, when we are talking about these laws, like the California law, where I've spent a lot of time on it, when people say it's just 2 words, what's the big deal? I'm like, it's really important because right now we have a trifecta that refers to each other. So when we have, by the way, approached Google, and lots of people have. So Google says, oh, the encyclopedia says it this way and the laws say it this way. When you talk to a legislative person, they say, oh, well, Google says it this way and the encyclopedia says it this way. If we approach the encyclopedia, I'm sure the encyclopedia would give us. So there's this circular citation loop. And that is why it is so important for at least the new laws to be accurate. And that is what I have been pleading with all the lawmakers I have spoken to, saying, look, I understand what was written 30 years ago or 40 years ago, you can't change it, I can't change it. But a brand new law from 2022, at least that should not repeat false knowledge, And if you do that, it becomes really hard to advocate for yourself. So like when I go to my schools, my kids' school, I say, hey, I'd like to talk about it. And they're like, hey, but the law says this. And my pointer to that is the law is old and outdated. If a new law from 2022 says the same stuff, my point becomes a lot harder to say because the school will say, or the police will say, well, why didn't you talk to the legislator? That is why laws have just outsized importance. And yes, of course, the more of us that can come up with strategies to change it in Google, that will also have a huge impact, which is why I asked the Vivek ji, who had said he was an Indian lawyer, to, in a way, and this is not a fight. This is just an approach. This is a persuasion and helping people see it based on facts and, the impact versus a big protest or a fight.
Great. I just have one question. In your presentation, you had multiple slides indicating that the indigenous people, the Native Americans or Indians, have been using swastika for quite some time. Did they see any impact around this, just like the Hindus do?
Yes, absolutely. So they call it, they don't call it swastik. They call it the whirling log and other terms. Different tribes have different names, but absolutely. I think one of these slides I shared said that the tribes were actually, as far back in 1940, asked to give up usage of this symbol, and obviously they were at that point and continue to be pretty marginalized. So you can see the sad state of affairs where the original inhabitants of North America had to give up their original sacred symbols because of European powers fighting with each other and co-opting words that they have no right to co-opt and symbols that they have no right to co-opt. And I think the Hindu community needs to learn, and the Hindu, Buddhist, Jain communities need to learn from that and make sure that 2-3 generations down the road, we are not in the same situation where we are asked to, where we just agree to give up a symbol that is so dear, so central, so sacred, and so ancient, because we are not bothered enough to fix this amplifying misunderstanding. The problem to understand is that this issue is getting amplified in the wrong direction, not right direction. So we all need to work to make sure that the understanding evolves in the correct direction and doesn't go further. And those were some of the slides I showed you about how known Hindu phobes are now starting to take the level of misunderstanding that has been built to amplify it further. And so we need to do the approach to bring it back to the correct ground.
Excellent. One last question is from Smriti Ji. She is asking the full name of Jeff that you mentioned.
Jeff Kelman.
If you can,
if you
can type that in the chat, it will be great. And also the book on swastika that is written.
Yeah, so I would suggest everybody go to our website, CoHNA.org, and you'll see very prominently featured the Swastika Education and Awareness Campaign. You will find all the materials that I have sourced this from in a easily downloadable brochure. That's the brochure that actually Chandra Aryaji was talking about. And if you follow us on social, if you go to our YouTube, I would recommend everybody go to our YouTube channel too. And it's called CoHNA Official. And we have a whole playlist on the swastika education. And you will see multiple events we have done with different types of faith leaders, with Dr. Nakagaki, with Jeff Kelman. So it's a fount of information with lots of faith leaders from different Hindu sampradayas as well. So I would encourage everybody to check out the YouTube swastika playlist as well, which can be found at CoHNA Official. That's our handle on YouTube. That's also our handle on most of our social channels. So we are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Follow us on at least one of those to stay connected. We also have a WhatsApp group for those of you who want to, who prefer WhatsApp. Just reach out to us, and of course, go to our website. There's many, many ways to contact us and find us. So hopefully one of them will work for you, for everybody.
No, that's great. So I think it's been an hour. So it's a good time to end this session here. And thank you so much, Pushpa, for coming over and providing all this fantastic information. Hopefully our participants will visit CoHNA.org and most importantly, become activists and start promoting Hindu causes going forward. And good luck to you and CoHNA as well. Thank you all for attending.
Inviting me. Namaste.
Thank you everybody for attending. We'll see you next time.